Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Compassionate, the Most Merciful. To all of our viewers out there, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And welcome back to The Rational, the intersection of faith and reason, where our guest is Dr. Ja'far Sheikh Idris. Dr. Ja'far, as always, it is great to be with you, sir. Sheikh, we've been talking, last time we talked was about democracy. And one of the issues people raise with regard to democracy is this aspect of human rights. And how, supposedly, that system is being very fair to human rights versus other systems. Islamic perspective on human rights will be our discussion for the day.
Okay. I think we had better start with why is it that the West is, why has this become an issue, human rights? I think it is because of secular democracy. Secular democracy raised a problem. I think we alluded to this in our last episode, I don't know, or the one before it. It raised a problem. And this question of human rights was introduced to solve that problem. The problem is, if you say that the people are sovereign, I mean the majority are sovereign, then everyone knows, people knew, that the majority can make unfair decisions regarding individuals and minorities. Therefore, they wanted to guard against this. So a limit must be set on the power of the majority
to protect,
to legislate. So they said that there are human rights, inalienable human rights. No one has the right to encroach upon them, whether they be individuals or the majority or so. And they said this for good reason, because everyone with a moral sense will agree that, for example, it is wrong to kill a person. So but that decision of killing some people for no reason except, for example, of their color or their age or something, or because they are extremely ill or so, everyone knows that this is unfair. But a democratic decision can be made regarding this.
Sure.
So they wanted to guard against this.
So initially it was a preventative measure.
I think so.
That they were able to foresee as a result of.
Yes, because it's very easy to see. But then this itself raised also other problems. And they discussed this. Well, the problem was who gave these rights?
These human rights,
yes,
that are supposedly now put on paper.
Yes. Well, what is the source of these human rights? Of course, some people would say God. But if it is a secular democracy, then you can't say God. They used in the past to say natural law. Natural law. There is something that's called natural law. Again, belief in natural law became very weak and so on. So they are left without any source for the for human rights. Why should, if someone asks, why shouldn't we kill a person? What can you say? You can, of course, say it is morally wrong or so, but you cannot say this is his right, this is an inalienable right, without having a good reason for that. If you are a believer, you can say, this is the right that God gave him, and you have no right to deprive him of a right that his Creator gave him. But if you are secular, then the problem cannot be solved.
If I may ask here, if you remember, you said this earlier, that God has endowed us with reason as well as with a moral sense.
Yes.
Is it not, or is it wrong to say that you really don't have, you said this earlier, you don't have to be a believer to have that moral sense, through which we were able to come to these aspects of human rights.
Yeah.
That part of reasoning, wouldn't that be acceptable?
Yes. if that is a result of the moral sense, then almost all people will agree. For example, to kill an innocent person, everyone would say that this is wrong, this is right. But human rights, the list of human rights is not confined, and I am glad you asked this question. The list of human rights is not confined to these self-evident rights that can be morally justified. And some people in the West criticize this. For example, there is something about work, the hours that a person works. And most controversial is about sex rights, rights related to sex. That a woman has the right to have sex with anyone she prefers, so long as she is doing this with a man or a woman. So long as they are doing this
with their own consent.
With their own consent. So there will be nothing wrong with fornication or adultery or homosexuality, and this would be considered as the right, the inalienable right of this person. And now that is not morally self-evident. And
that's where we're pausing the question as to what is your source for determining this to be a person's right?
As I think I mentioned in one of the earlier episodes, I asked one lady about this, and she couldn't give me an answer except that she said that there is a consensus on this. I said, if there is a consensus, you don't make laws. There is no law telling people to drink water or to eat or to sleep or so, because people do this. There's a consensus on this. You don't need that. Now, if you say the justification is that it has been passed, as this lady told me, by the United Nations. Now, there are two objections to this. One is, why should I abide by what the majority of the people in the United Nations decided? Why should I abide by that decision? Sure. And also the most serious problem will be, now you have gone back to majority rule. This problem of human rights was introduced to set a limit to majority rule. And now you are justifying it by majority decisions. So the argument becomes circular.
Sure.
I think these can be our main objections to the concept of human rights as it is understood. In fact, some thinkers or philosophers in the West, I read once something by an American philosopher. He said, for example, people in Europe believe that killing a person, even if he killed someone, there is no capital punishment. They think that this is
cruel.
It is human right. To take a life of a person is to deprive him of an inalienable right.
That is of living.
Yes.
Or of life.
Yes. So there can be absolutely no justification for taking the life of a person, even if he killed 1,000 persons. This man said, but we go by democracy. If the majority of our people say that there should be capital punishment, and in fact someone said, I have read recently, someone said that even in Europe, in fact the majority of the people would say there must be capital punishment. But because these leaders, political, intellectual leaders, have come to the belief that this is a right, it is there in the laws and the constitution. But there is no justification for it, except that it has somehow become a law.
Interesting. And so you're saying that the objection of the believers would be the fact that the source is not clearly identified
Not identified at all, not clearly or vaguely.
I'm
There is
thinking-
no source at all, except that it is passed by the United Nations or your written in your constitution. And sometimes I laugh when I see, for example, in the Sudan now, when they made this constitution, I think because of influence of the West also, the late Garang insisted that some of these documents be included in the Sudanese constitution. And I'm sure people know nothing about this. You say that this is a democracy, this is the constitution of a democratic country, and then you introduce something about which people know almost nothing. And if they knew, they would not agree to what is in that Declaration of Human Rights. And I'm mentioning the Sudan only as an example, but this is what people all over the world are doing just because Europe or the West is doing
that. So again, Sheikh, it would be the not mentioning of the source. In Islam, then we would say...
Yes. In Islam, the word right is there in Arabic. But the most important right in Islam is the right of God to be worshipped. You remember the famous hadith, ما حق الله على العبيد. What is the right of God against his servants? And the answer is that they should worship him and nothing besides him. This is the most important right. And it is from this divine right that other rights emanate. ما حق العبيد على الله. Even human beings have a right against their creator. And the answer was that if they worship none but him, then it will be their right against him not to punish them or to make them enter paradise. Okay. This is one thing. Now, the most important right of a human being, according to Islam, is that he worships his Lord. This is the most inalienable right.
Sheikh, I'm sorry. Now, you're putting this as a list of priorities. I mean, you're saying that this is the most important
right of the human being.
Okay. And I'm sorry, yes. and I believe that the list does get, of course, bigger. But we will have to take a short break, inshallah, and we will return, so please stay tuned with us.
You have questions that bother you. What about issues of concern to you? Would you like to share things on your mind with us? Are you interested in solutions based on an Islamic perspective? Please join me live in Meet Your Advisor every Friday at 9 p.m. Mecca time, here on Huda TV.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace and blessings of God be upon all of you out there. And thank you for joining us again in the Rationale, the intersection of faith and reason, with our guest here, Dr. Ja'far Sheikh Idris. Dr. Ja'far, we're talking about human rights and talking about secular democracy and the need as a preventative measure it introduces such a thing. And now we're talking about Islam and the rights in Islam. And you said the word haqq is actually mentioned in the Quran, prophetic tradition as well. And he said that the most important of all rights is the right of God, that he be worshipped and none but him should be worshipped. And then you were moving on, you said that from
as
this
far
right,
as human beings are concerned, the most important right is the right to worship their Creator. No one has the right. This is mentioned in the first verses that were revealed to Prophet Muhammad in Surah, the surah that the chapter that is called Iqra. أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين أرأيت الذي ينهى عبدا إذا صلى أرأيت إن كان على الهدى أو أمر بالتقوى. So the worst thing to do, the most criminal act, is to prevent a person from worshipping his Lord. This, according to Muslims, this right is more important even than the right to live. And the Quran says, "Al-fitnatu ashaddu min al-qatl." To make it difficult for a person to stick to to the true religion is worse than killing him.
Sheikh, I'm sorry, but some people may find this to be very strange in the sense that why is the right to worship more important than the right to live? Simply because if you're not alive, you're not really worshiping. You can't worship if you're dead. So I'm not sure it's clear that...
Because if you live without worshipping, that's the worst thing you can do. It is better for you to die as a believer than to live as an unbeliever. And also because of the reason that we mentioned before, that the requirements of the soul are more important than those of the body. Of course, the body is important. There can be no soul without a body. But you can sacrifice one for the other.
And now, being a devil's advocate, if it is your right to worship whom you wish to worship...
Not whom you worship.
If it's your right to worship your Creator, God, what do I have that same right to refuse to worship?
No. No, you don't have the right, but you can. You have the choice. But it is not called right. Because if you say right, this means this is good, that is good, and you have the right to choose this or to choose that. But now we are saying that this is bad, that is good. But it's up to you. You can choose. فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ.
So at that point, we won't call it a right, but we would call it a choice that you are entitled to.
Yes.
And
yes.
we want, of course, to stamp it with
yes.
nobility.
Yes.
But you are still protected from being violated.
Yes, as we said in the previous episodes, لا إكراه في الدين. No, there is no compulsion in religion. No.
Interesting. I am saying this because I am very sure that some of our non-Muslim viewers out there would be very intrigued by statements like these. So you're saying this is the first right?
This is the first and most important human right. But generally speaking, we can say that everything that God ordered you to do or to abstain from doing becomes your right to do or abstain from doing. No one will have the right to prevent you from doing what your Creator told you to do, and no one has the right to force you to do something which God said don't do. This general. So the rights of human beings become very vast. There are many rights as there are divine orders of prohibitions. But some of them are more important than others. Like we mentioned the right to worship God, and one right that I saw the importance of which when I was in the United States, because it is easily violated, and it is not counted in the Declaration of Human Rights. And that is the right of having your child attributed to you. You know, in the United States, and I don't know whether in many other European, Western countries, your child can be taken from you and given to another family, and he will be their child officially or legally. In Islam, this cannot happen. Whatever the parents do, the child is still their parent, their child. Even if they kill him, still we'd say that killed child is the son or the child of so and so.
And that right is never lost.
Never. That very clearly mentioned in the Quran. In ummahatuhum illa allahi waladnahum. Their mothers are only those who gave birth to them. And I think that this is an example of the most natural right, because this is what we call the child. It's being given birth by a woman in this way. So you can't change this. But in the West, it can easily be changed. I remember a very sad story of a Muslim who was found kissing his daughter in a public place. And some people, some silly people, interpret this as being child abuse.
Child molestation.
Yes. And so he was punished and deprived of not only of the daughter, but also of the son. And they were given to a Catholic family. The higher court, when they made an appeal, the higher court said the decision of the first court was wrong, because the higher court was convinced that this was a matter of culture. In the culture of those people, there is nothing wrong in kissing your daughter or so. But decisions, something like this, of adoption cannot be changed.
Interesting.
Now, once the decision has been made, a court decision has been made, that this child belongs to that family, then it belongs to that family. In Islam, this cannot happen.
To begin with,
Yeah,
let alone that
yes,
you don't change
yes,
it later on.
You might, if there is something wrong with the parents or so, you might take the child from them, give it to another family. That it would, I think Islam would recommend that you give the child to some relatives who would care for the child, or some friends of the parents. So it can be the child, for the sake of the protection of the child, he can be taken from their family. But he will still be their child, and he will be named after them.
So the fact that the parents get to keep that right does not by any means promote jeopardizing the well-being
and that is why
of the child.
There is no adoption in Islam.
In that sense.
Yes, you cannot say of a child that is not your child that he is my child. He cannot take your name.
In that
there is the right of wealth. Of course, this also in liberalism. There is the right. You are entitled to everything that you earned lawfully. No one has the right to take your wealth from you, except that you also do what God told you to pay what is it called, zakah,
dues to the poor,
and so on. But you have a right to that. You have the right. In the West, they say freedom of expression. The expression, the Islamic expression, is more positive. It says, ordering people to amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar.
The duty to enjoin that which is good and forbid.
Not just expression, because even the worst dictatorship will not prevent people from expressing.
And that's what makes it more positive.
Yes. So no one has the right also to tell you not to invite people to
goodness,
or
to prevent evil.
From it. This is your right. There are circumstances, and they are mentioned in the religion itself, that if this leads to something more harmful, then don't do it, because the purpose is that you increase the good and you decrease the evil. This is a very rational principle. It is well known, even people, non-Muslims know this. It is always better to do the lesser of two evils,
Sure.
and to do the better of two goods. This is a rational principle. So don't invite people to good if the result would be more evil, and so on. There is perhaps the last example I have is the right to tell the truth. This is perhaps the most important right after the first right that we mentioned of worshipping none but God. And that is why the Prophet, you know that hadith you mentioned, that the Prophet made something like a contract to some of his companions that they always tell the truth. So no one now has the right to tell them not to tell the truth. And so on. So generally speaking, we can say that everything which God told you to do becomes your right to do. Everything which He said should not be taken from you, then that will be. No one should take your life, because God said you can take life only under these circumstances. So anyone who takes a person's life without fulfilling these conditions, then he will be depriving him of his Ramadan.
Sheikh, we have about a minute left. I'd like you to comment on what I find to be very intriguing in Islam. And that's where the Quran says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Indeed, we have honored all the children of Adam, irrespective of their beliefs or of any of that.
Yes, this is a very important, and many people in the West don't know about this. Of course, they know as human beings what they call the human dignity. Human dignity. You are not. And I'm glad you mentioned this, because this can be one of the rights. I have been honored or given dignity by God. So you don't have the right to treat me as an animal, or even if I am not. Whatever I do, I should not be treated like an animal. And there are very interesting prophetic traditions about this. The Prophet ﷺ saw someone leading his relative by a rope or a string. And the Prophet didn't like this. And he came and cut off the string and said, lead him by his hand, because he will be treating him like an animal. So, and it is forbidden also to mutilate a person, whatever he does. He can be killed, but you don't have the right to cut off his nose or ear or so.
To take away that God-given human dignity
because,
and honor from them. Sheikh, Jazakallah khair, and a very interesting topic that we had here. Thank you for being with us. And thank you for joining us, and hope that you join us the next time we meet as well. Until then, we say so long, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.